You look at the pictures that were of her and her mother, where it appeared they had a great relationship.
But the pictures were deceiving. Both women in these photos are now dead after this 26-year-old woman was shot and killed by Australian police when they found her repeatedly stabbing her mother to death.
This was a crime of passion. I think this was something not intended, but something triggered it.
It's a tragic story that seemingly stems from a mental health issue, as newly released social media messages foreshadow a breakdown.
It is very, very tough to put somebody into a mental health facility against their will. I mean, it just is.
On Friday, March 8th, an emergency call came into dispatch in Lower Plenty, Victoria. That's a suburb of Melbourne, Australia. The caller reported a woman was trying to set her mother on fire. That woman was identified as 26-year-old Carly Pirronelli, and her mother was 53-year-old Joanne Perry. When officers arrived on the scene, they found Pirronelli repeatedly stabbing her mother in the neck and chest. They called for her to stop, but Pirronelli refused. That's when she was shot by first responders. Both women were later pronounced dead at the scene. Former homicide detective Phil Waters says it's a shocking case.
It's a sad state of affairs from a whole lot of different perspectives, having worked both officer involved shootings and homicides. But this is one where you've got, in the process of the murder taking place, the officers that respond, the suspect refuses to put down the knife and continues to stab her mother. It's unique in the sense that you've got not only a homicide, you not only have a murder, but you've got an officer involved shooting.
Aspects of the case are out of the ordinary. One thing that really jumped out right away is that in the cases I cover, oftentimes investigators get there after the murder has already occurred. They're there to investigate, maybe track down a suspect. But is it common that they arrive and see a murder in progress?
That's kind of an anomaly. I mean, I can't think of over the course of my career where, gosh, maybe one or two times where an officer shows up and the homicide is in progress. It's actually taking place, and then the officer has to use deadly force to take care of the suspect. And in most cases, and it's unfortunate in this particular case that the victim in this case is already dead. So it's just sad from a whole lot of different directions.
From the police perspective, Waters says first responders have a lot going through their minds when responding to such a chaotic scene. It is an intense moment. A lot of factors are going into it. Things are probably happening really, really fast. But what is going through the minds of a first responder when they get there? Are they weighing their options of what to do?
Well, I can tell you that in situations like this, and I have responded to call when I was in patrol. I have responded to calls that were in progress. And when you get there, you are given some information about what is happening. So you're trying to plan what you're going to do for whatever contingency you find when you get there. And that's what these officers are doing, I have no doubt. So when that happens, you revert to training. These officers are trained, and they're mulling over in their minds what they're going to do when they get there. And when they get there, they see what they see. So they respond in a way that their training has brought them to make that proper decision at the time. So it's the minute they get the call becomes the process of what are we going to do? What decisions are we going to possibly have to make once we get on the scene? And they got there and they saw what they had. They had to quickly assess it. And like you just said, Sierra, that these things are happening in seconds. I mean, it's not like on television where there's a commercial break. So you get there and you have what you have, and these officers responded in the way they've been trained, and unfortunately weren't able to save the life of the victim in this case.
Did officers react in the appropriate way? I mean, it ended up in an officer involved shooting, but did they do everything right?
Oh, I think so, given the circumstances. When an officer shows up at a scene, especially when it's in progress, you're having to make instantaneous decisions that are going to have very final outcomes. And in this particular case, they gave, from what I've read in the rendering of this particular case, they did what they were supposed to do, trying to tell her to put down the knife, trying to get her off of her mom, and she refused to do that. And so she continued to stab her mother. And the only choice at that point in time, you always have a choice. So it's not a question of didn't have a choice. They had a choice. The choice was we just continue to watch, monitor this woman, what she's doing, or do we attempt to try to save the mother in the process of being stabbed? And that's what they tried to do. And so they're forced into making a decision where they have to use deadly force in an attempt to try to save another life.
Victoria police have since stated there was no other choice than to fire at Pirronelli because she refused to drop the knife and stop stabbing her mother. In the days since both women's deaths, it's become clear that Pirronelli was suffering from mental health issues leading up to the murder.
She had a lot of issues. I mean, there's a lot of background there regarding mental illness and that kind of a thing.
According to reports, neighbors near the family's home heard Pirronelli make repeated threats in the weeks ahead of her mother's murder, including threats to set her on fire. Ahead of this specific event, neighbors had witnessed multiple domestic situations at the home and even called emergency responders in the past. Additional reports also say Perry was working to find her daughter mental health help, but Pirronelli resisted.
And her mother was trying to get her into a mental health facility. And look, Australia, I don't think is much different than the United States, not much different than Texas. I mean, it is very, very tough to put somebody into a mental health facility against their will. I mean, it just is. Now, if she wanted to go in there voluntarily on her own, she could have gone in. But I know that in Texas, when we find somebody that's a health hazard or a threat to themselves or to others, you can obtain a mental health warrant, emergency mental health warrant, put them in a mental health facility. Of course, that period only lasts for 72 hours for observation, and then in most cases, they're kicked loose. So it's tough.
Pirronelli also put her feelings down in Facebook messages ahead of her death. In one message that has since been released, she wrote in part, quote, "Feels like so much games is going on. I can't deal. Been the most dramatic last year for no reason. Find it hard to even handle it because I'm not used to drama. Stresses me out."
I think the fact that someone is having mental health issues, that should alarm a family member and so forth and so on, just based on what maybe the dialogue is or what they're posting and that kind of a thing, and then trying to get them help of some kind. But the issue you have here with mental health issues is that person being willing to accept some help. It's kind of one of these coulda, shoulda, woulda cases, right? Could something that the mother had could have accomplished, would it have stopped what eventually occurred, what ultimately occurred? Should there have been some action taken that was not taken? Would that have changed things? And then would any of those actions change the ultimate outcome? So it's this is one of these things where it's easy to look back and kind of, armchair quarterback these things, but when it's happening in real time, and I'm sure the mother, this was the furthest thing from her mind about something like this happening.
Investigators say Pirronelli had a past criminal history, and at the time of her mother's murder, she was out on bond. But Waters believes they're likely unrelated.
In isolation, I don't think that particular incident. It was a home invasion and a robbery, I think, type of deal, and she was with other individuals, as I understand it, and so forth. So it's kind of a separate case. It's an indication that she's got some problems.
Let's pause this story for just a minute to thank Morgan & Morgan for sponsoring today's Law and Crime YouTube takeover. It's stories like the one we're working on today that remind us you never really know what's going to happen, and the world isn't always safe. So when you're hurt, it can be confusing, it can be scary, and you don't really know where to turn. Well, Morgan & Morgan, America's largest injury law firm, can help. You can submit a claim in just one click on your phone, and your injury could be worth millions. Morgan & Morgan doesn't settle for lowball offers either. In the past couple of months, they've gotten verdicts of $12 million in Florida, $26 million in Philadelphia, and $6.8 million in New York. All of these, by the way, were significantly higher than the highest insurance offer. So if you're injured, you can start by easily submitting a claim at www.forthepeople.com/YouTube takeover, or by dialing #law, that's #529 on your phone. Now, let's get back to our story. On the surface level, Waters says things appeared normal between the mother and daughter, but there were likely more issues behind closed doors.
You look at the pictures that were of her and her mother, where it appeared they had a great relationship, at least at that point in time when those pictures were taken, and so forth and so on. You just don't know what the dynamic is here between the mother and the daughter, and we see some physical things that may have indicated that they were kind of playing off of one another, and then it gets to the point where she's already got these issues, and the mother, who knows, confronting those issues again. You need help.
Moving forward, Waters says there will be multiple investigations.
She used a knife. I mean, so it'll be interesting to see if this was a weapon of opportunity, if the knife came out of the kitchen drawer, or if this was something she went out, bought, carried with her, and in her head, if I get into a confrontation like this again, it's it's cutting time. So, they're going to be there's so many facets of this. When was the last time she was at the mother's house? Was she living at the mother's house? I mean, there's just so many parts of this investigation they're going to have to try to pin down to see what led up to this and why it manifested into this tragic homicide.
Social media accounts will also play a prominent role in the investigation.
There'll be an investigation. There'll be a, because the answer, the questions are, the big question is, and always in any homicide investigation, is why? Why did this happen? So we've got the who, what, where, when, and how, but we need the why. And that will be, this investigation will be moving forward, is to try to understand why something like this occurred. Now, in terms of the officer involved shooting, that will be in place as a separate investigation to determine the why the deadly force had to be used. And it doesn't sound to me like this is going to be anything other than justifiable. So, but that investigation will be conducted just to make sure that law enforcement acted appropriately in the given set of circumstances and what they saw when they got there. So there will be two parallel investigations going on here in this particular incident.
What would the investigation into the motive look like? Because it appears, at least, that this was some sort of mental break. Is there anything specifically that investigators would do to look into why?
Well, sure, they're going to be going over her social media. They're going to be talking to her friends. They're going to be talking to the people. If she was with somebody when they did the home invasion, and they're going to talk to their, her associates that were involved in that particular offense. So they're going to be culling through anybody that had a relationship with her. They'll be talking to the neighbors. They'll do a canvas of the neighborhood there to find out what they heard, what somebody may have seen. So they're going to delve into, they're going to get as much information into her background as they can possibly get. And that's going to be getting out there and hitting the bricks and talking to all these different people and doing the deep dive into her, especially into these social media sites where she may have posted some things that indicated there's a building up.
Waters says investigators will also look into Joanne Perry's social media history.
Of course, the investigation they're going to be doing, as they'll be doing the same type of background with the mother. So they're going to want to know the backgrounds of all the players in this thing. So in order to determine, I mean, and possibly find out if the mother was posting things on social media. So there's going to be a lot of background information that's going to be delved into, they're going to peel back the onion not only on her, but on the mom as well.
Does it seem more likely that this was premeditated or that it was a crime of passion and just happened in the moment?
That's a great question, Sierra. I think my impression is, and this will be borne out by the investigation, is that this was a crime of passion. I think this was something not intended, but something triggered it. So I would now, through the course of the investigation, they may find that she went to her mother's house and the specific purpose was to confront her about something. But just what we know and just what I have read about, it would appear to me, at least at first blush, that this was a crime of passion.
Homicide detectives with the Victoria Police are still investigating the crime, as are officials from the Professional Standards Command. According to a release, that's what's customary in an officer-involved shooting in Australia. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Gillespie.